So Salesman is a pretty interesting card that I think even though people are not really utilizing very well, its potential is quite limitless. I'm saying this because a lot of people are kind of treating it as Crossout Designator 2.0 where they sight it in going first, they randomly call a hand shop and hope that it works out. And my man, I can tell you that with a 33.76% chance of randomly calling a hand trap like successfully, your game plan kind of sucks. Makes sense, obviously, otherwise Prohibition would have been a side deck staple for years. I mean, it used to be, but that's another story for another day. Anyways, I'm not gonna bother reading the card effect because obviously you can just do it yourself, but I will say that the card is really unique in the way it operates. So basically, the card that you declare with Salesman usually isn't the kind of card that you want to play in your own deck because obviously you're gonna be locked out of utilizing it for the rest of the duel, whereas your opponent can only not use it for one single turn. So in a way, it's very similar to like the drawback of the Dominus cards. But also, just like the Dominus cards, its drawback can randomly be used at your advantage sometimes. So with the Dominus cards, especially with Dominus Impulse, if you can't use Earth effects, then you're kind of shutting down the whole Mimigold strategy because they rely on making you use Earth effects on your field. And with Salesman, I do remember that people were kind of like cheating out like a wrong go with like numbers FA or something, and then they were calling wrong go with Salesman in order to make sure that it would never lose materials so that you would randomly have like an invincible monster that would stay there forever. Realistically though, the drawback will pretty much always hurt you, which is why this card is quite terrible if you are calling a card that you are playing yourself. If you are playing a Razor Mirror match, for example, and then you call Razor Detonator, sure, your going second will be better because there is not going to be a Detonator for you to deal with, but at the same time, you won't be able to summon or use Detonator yourself for the rest of the duel. So you get to a position where you have to OTK, otherwise your grind game is going to be really bad, and yeah, let's not try to grind with Razor without Detonator against someone who can still use Detonator against you. Obviously, the same logic applies to like pretty much every other mirror match in the entire game, as well as commonly played cards. Now, I will say Salesman excels in situations where a lot of cards are completely useless. And what makes Salesman incredibly unique is its ability to just ignore how resilient and layered some end boards are. Let's say, hypothetically speaking, your opponent has, let's say, Mitsurugi Prayers and Murakumo on the field. So if you got Imperm, then it's not going to save you from the Murakumo Regeki effect because you're going to have to commit by summoning monsters, and it's not like you can use the Imperm right away because your opponent is just going to revive back the Murakumo on your field while you play off of the Prayers. If you have Ash, it's going to be completely useless because what are you going to do? Ash the Prayers? Okay, Murakumo effect. And if you have Ghostbell and you Ghostbell the Prayers, it's the exact same thing as ashing it, and if you're trying to hold it for Murakumo, well, what if they revive back Murakumo off of Prayers to play around Ghostbell? Salesman ignores all of that completely, no bullshit, you just call Murakumo, and just like that, you are guaranteed no Regeki on your field. Same thing with Detonator with like a Twins of Eclipse underneath, by the way. Imperm would be pretty bad here because your opponent can just self-destruct and then the Detonator comes back with 2 pops. Even against the Malice deck, when you see how layered their whole setup is, calling Salesman on, let's say, like a White Binder can be a huge detriment to their whole strategy. And you might be thinking, okay, that's cool and all, but you can just also Ghostbell the GWC, right? Well, again, the problem is that Ghostbell in this situation is a fair 1-for-1 trade and would actually lose out to your opponent just having like an alternative option such as a Bestial or March Hare especially, which is searchable. However, if you call White Binder with Salesman, even if your opponent has both GWC and the March Hare, your opponent still can't do much of anything. Now, the next applications for Salesman is actually quite interesting as well. Sometimes you go second, you notice that your opponent has a lot of back row and you randomly call something like Imperm or a Solemn card and it actually works out. And I say this because sometimes there's a lot of like duplicates, like you call like an Imperm and your opponent had 2 Imperm face down and all of a sudden you get to play through like 2 disruptions with 1 single card. Obviously this is just a random example, but depending on the context and the knowledge you have on your opponent's deck, this definitely can make sense. I want to reiterate the fact that I don't think Salesman is good when you are randomly calling a name, but when there is a high chance that your opponent is playing the card and might actually really have it in their hand or field or whatever, then Salesman is all of a sudden pretty good. If you activate something like Triple Tactic Talent to look at your opponent's hand and now you've got knowledge on your opponent's hand, then using Salesman is obviously always going to resolve and, you know, obviously to its full extent. And obviously decks like Malice or Labyrinth will sometimes set traps in front of you so you know exactly what to call and it's always going to work out as well. So the conclusion to all of this is the following. Salesman is a card that isn't great going first because again there's like a 33.76% chance of you successfully calling a 3 of hand shop in a 40 card deck. However, the card is extremely good going second at especially ignoring how layered and resilient end boards can be. It can randomly perform much better than any other board breaker in that given context, and it is insanely good at dealing with one specific card for a single turn. And we all know that in Yu-Gi-Oh! 1 turn is all you need to change everything. Anyways, that's all I had for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know how you feel about Salesman in the comment section below, and I'll see you guys very soon. Peace.